Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon when you are watching this video lecture. In the earlier session related to cost of capital, we discussed about some of the basic concepts related to the cost of capital and what is the importance of cost of capital for the organizations. Also, we discussed about computation of individual costs of capital, particularly cost of debt, both redeemable and irredeemable. Same way, cost of preference shares, both redeemable and irredeemable. What are the formulae for them and how to compute them, we discussed in the earlier session. Now let us continue this discussion with one more very important individual cost of capital, that is cost of equity share capital. So like KD represents cost of debt, KP represents cost of preference shares, cost of equity shares can be denoted as KE. But there is a major difference between KD, KP and KE. What is the uniqueness of this? First point is, unlike debt and preference share capital, equity share capital need not be serviced as a compulsion. So there is no pressure on the company to pay dividend. If it wants to pay, it will pay, otherwise it will not pay. So the point is, when we look at KD, which is influenced by interest majorly, naturally, that interest is real. Actually, the company has to pay. Same way, when we look at KP, which is influenced by the preference dividend, that is also real. That is also something which the company has to pay because it has committed to pay that. Whereas in case of KE, the equity dividend is not necessarily real. So interest as well as preference dividend are going to be predetermined. How much interest to be paid, how much preference dividend to be paid is not something secret. Company knows that. Respective debenture holders or bond holders or preference shareholders know that because already it is published. When the issue of the instrument happens, then itself the actual instrument will have as its prefix its interest rate or preference dividend. For example, if a company issues 9% debentures, so that itself shows clearly that, okay boss, interest rate is 9%. Let us say a company issues 7.5% preference shares. So that is clear. 7.5% is going to be the preference dividend. So this is something which is known, real, predetermined, and there is no point of expectation here as far as debt and preference share capital is concerned. Whereas when it comes to equity dividend, there is no particular rate that is mentioned. No company promises any equity dividend. Actually, it does not need to pay any dividend also. So logically speaking, if we say there is no need to pay equity dividend, can we say the cost of equity is zero? Because there is no real cost that is involved as an obligation on part of the company, unlike debt and preference shares. Can we say that? No, we cannot say that. In fact, the cost of equity is going to be more than the cost of debt and cost of preference shares. It is not zero, definitely. Why is that? Because these two are real. Let us say if you deposit your money in a bank account which offers say 6% interest, you know that you will get 6% interest. There is no secret in that. But if you invest in any equity shares of a company, what is the return that you are going to get? Is there any guarantee for that? No. Is there any particular percentage that can be there as known figure? No. But will you invest without expecting a return? Definitely not. So when it comes to equity, it is not the real payment that matters. What matters is expectations. And when you know something, definitely that is having its own number prescribed to it. But when it is open-ended, if somebody asks you a question, let us say if you have few lakhs of rupees with you and you want to invest in the equity shares of any company, how much return do you want? What is your expectation? Will there be any one answer from any of you? Each of you will have different expectations. Each of the investors, each of the equity shareholders will have different expectations. And another point is, what is the limit for these expectations? If someone says, I want 10% return, because bank is giving me only 7%, I want something more than that. Let us say if some investor's logic is that. That is the expectation, 10%. Somebody may expect 12%. Somebody may say, I want 25%. Somebody may say any number. I want 4,500%. Do you have any problem with that? If you get 4,500% return, nobody in the world will have a problem with that. So the point is, the expectations are not going to be same. That is one point. Another point is, expectations are unlimited. They are infinite. So now the challenge comes. When we say KE is an expectation, are we going to call or take a survey from each of the shareholders, asking them, sir, what is your expectation? Madam, what is your expectation? Then I will average all of that. Then I will get KE. Is that possible? Absolutely not possible. That is just ridiculous. Because if you really understand the equity shares as an instrument, the owners of the equity shares change every 5 seconds. Forget about minutes, hours and days. Owners of the equity change second-wise. In the stock market, whenever somebody purchases, he becomes a shareholder. If somebody sells it, he's gone. He's not on their shareholders list. Of course, if he sells all the shares. So the point is, there is no standard set of equity shareholders. That is one problem. Second point is, it is just impossible. It is so ridiculous to take feedback from equity shareholders asking them expectations. Even if you ask them, they will tell what are the number that comes into their mind, which is just not making any sense. Conceptually, yes, cost of equity is expectation. No doubt about it. So it is an expectation, definitely. But practically, how can we quantify that expectation? That is difficult. That is why there are multiple ways. Different people have suggested different ways for calculating cost of equity. So there is no single method for calculation of cost of equity because of the problem what we discussed just now. But there are multiple methods. Of course, end of the day we have to use the formula only. But different formula are used in different contexts. Let us say if dividend is expected to be constant, then dividend price approach can be used. We'll see what is the formula for that. Let us say if earnings per share is expected to be constant, then earnings price approach can be used. So there is one approach called dividend price approach, second approach called earnings price approach, which is again not so practical assumption. Why? Because dividends and earnings generally are not expected to be constant. Shareholders always want more. They want growth. So generally they are expected to grow. In that case, we can use growth approach, also called Gordon's growth model. Gordon is the person who invented that. So it is called Gordon's growth model that can be used when there is growth. What is growth? Growth to what? Growth to dividend or growth to earnings. And if it is difficult to forecast the future, we can look at the past. What is the realized yield that really, actually this particular equity share has given in the past? That can be safely presumed to be a similar kind of expectation we can have about future. That approach is called realized yield approach. But most practical approach in real life also, most important and most commonly used approach is capital asset pricing model. CAPM is the more scientific approach than others. Why? Because naturally, when we look at the cost of equity, since it is about expectations, the expectations of the investors is dependent on risk. Risk is always a perceived risk. So what is the risk perception of the investors will be represented in the cost of equity. We may not be able to quantify it by interviewing each investor, not possible. However, logically we can definitely say higher the risk, higher the expected return will be. Definitely yes. So this logic or this valid point is used in the capital asset pricing model because it considers risk also into consideration. So that is capital asset pricing model. We will come to each of these models and how to calculate cost of equity. We need to learn that. Dividend price approach, earnings price approach, Gordon's growth model, realized yield approach and capital asset pricing model. These are the different types of approaches or formulae, methodologies for what? Ultimately to compute cost of equity. Let us first look at dividend price approach. This can be called as dividend valuation model. In simple words, the dividend is expected to be constant perpetually. So if you look at a logic of what is the present value of all the future cash flows, let us say dividend in year 1, year 2, year 3, like that, we know that company has a perpetual existence. So what should be the present value of that? All various things which are all going to be received in future. Ideally, each year should be discounted with, each year's dividend should be discounted with the respective present value interest rate factors or discount factors. But is it required when we are looking at infinity? Not required. Simply, what can be done in such cases is whatever the return that you are getting, in this case dividend, and in this case we are expecting that to be constant, it is not going to change. Every year same dividend is going to be received. How many years? Infinitely. What will be the present value of that? In order to find it out, whatever is the rate of return that is expected, if it is the denominator, automatically we will get the present value of perpetuity. So normally present value of anything that we are going to receive in future is by discounting the cash flows that will be received in future. What if the cash flows are perpetually going to be received? Then all that we need to do is take whatever the earnings are, in this case dividend, divided by whatever is the rate, discount rate, let us call it. This logic applies to valuation of anything in the world, and that applies to equity shares also. Now what is the present value of that? Naturally that should be the market price, that can be denoted as P0. So how the current market price, or at least market price, you may think that really is it the price traded in stock market? Definitely not. Theoretical price. This is theoretical market price, we can call it. So theoretically speaking, what should be the value of an equity share on which you are expecting to receive the dividends perpetually, that too without any growth? There is a constant dividend which is going to be received in future. So how to calculate that market price? It simply is a normal valuation technique. Simply whatever the return that you are expecting in the form of dividend divided by the discount factor or discount rate. Now we are doing actually the reverse calculation. We don't want the market price, we want rate itself. What is the discount rate? Here, that is cost of equity. So how to find out cost of equity? Cross multiplication. D, that is the expected dividend, divided by P naught, that is current market price. So now it is easier. Of course, formula wise anything is okay. But logically speaking, can we compute the market price? Is it something in our hands? No, it is reality. So this can be taken from reality, that is current market price, and dividend whatever is expected to be maintained throughout the future is some number which is already a constant. So naturally what happens, we can easily find out KE using this formula. This formula is called as dividend price approach. So dividend price approach is D divided by P naught, current market price. Now you can relate it to, in fact, another formula which you should know in the ratio analysis, dividend yield. What was the formula? Dividend per share divided by market price per share. Is it not the same? Of course it is the same. So dividend price approach itself means just we are applying the dividend yield formula. Yield is the percentage return. How much is that percentage return which we are now calling as cost of equity? That percentage return is dividend divided by P naught is current market price. That is dividend yield approach. Formula wise nothing new, only application wise, context wise it is different. Earlier in ratio analysis it was just called as dividend yield. Now we are calling it as cost of equity. Formula is same. Now KE is cost of equity, D is the expected dividend, because we are looking at a constant dividend throughout the future, we can just use the word D. P naught indicates now, 0 indicates now. So market price of the equity, X dividend price, of course. Now, whatever is the market price, that is the denominator. That's it. That is dividend price approach. For simple understanding, dividends yield. Whatever the formula of dividend yield we know, it is the same formula which is used for computation of cost of equity. Now we knew earlier earnings yield also, another formula in ratio analysis. If we use that, that will be earnings price approach. So what is cost of equity under earnings price approach? EPS by MPS. So earlier in case of dividend yield it was DPS by MPS, dividend per share by market price per share. Now earnings per share divided by market price per share. Of course, only point of difference here is the context of application in case of ratio analysis will be analysis of the past, what are already happened. But here it will be about future. So the expectation will be there, which can be looked at if the data is available. If the data is not available, whatever the current earnings are there, that only can be taken. So earnings per share divided by market price per share is what is earnings yield, and the same thing is now cost of equity under different approach. This is earnings price approach. That is the second approach for computation of cost of equity. It is very similar to the dividend yield approach, but dividend price approach. But earnings price approach is better because in case of dividend price approach, the dividend policy of the company also will have an impact on the cost of equity. If company declares dividends and more dividends, then it's a different story. If the company does not declare dividends or has a policy of declaring very less dividends, it may look like the cost of equity is less because numerator is less, but it is not reality. That's why the dividend price approach is influenced by the dividend policy also of the company, whereas earnings price approach is influenced by the earnings of the company, which is reality. Earnings of the company is the real performance of the company. So the performance of the company is a better benchmark or indicator than something which is based on some decision taken by the management, which is dividend. Of course, any of the approaches can be used. In the examinations, whatever the requirement of the question is, according to the data that is available, we have to use any of these formulae. That is normal for any chapter. Same logic applies here also. So one is dividend price approach, other one is earnings price approach. In first case, dividend divided by current market price. In second case, earnings per share divided by current market price per share. That is two different approaches. But effectively, formula wise, they are nothing but the formula which we know already. First one is dividends yield, second one is earnings yield. Any of them now can be called as cost of equity. That is one way of calculating cost of equity. But what is the problem with them? Both of them is that is expecting a constant earnings and constant dividend in future, which is not normally correct, because the expectation of the shareholders also will be in such a way that they want growth. Company wants to grow. Shareholders want growth in the company. Constant dividend, constant earnings is not something that is expected. So naturally, the earlier two approaches ignore the factor of the growth expectations of the shareholders. That is why they have that limitation. That limitation is overcome by the person called Gordon. So the Gordon growth model is something which considers growth rate also, which is expected as part of the cost of equity. So what is added here? Original formula D by P naught anyway was there. Now what are we doing is we are adding the expected growth rate also. But this growth rate is constant. Growth rate is constant. Dividend is not constant. Dividend will change. In what rate it will change? With a constant growth rate, 4%, 3%, 2%, 8%, whatever it is. Some constant growth rate is expected. So the dividend growth rate remains constant. That is a point here to be noted as an assumption. But which dividend we are looking at? Is it the current dividend or next dividend? Not current dividend. Denotions wise, if you see, if we say D naught, means now, that is existing dividend per share. But is that what we are taking in numerator now? No, it is not. We are taking D1, which means what? After 1 year, how much will be the dividend? How that can be calculated? Whatever D naught is there, add growth rate to that. So D naught multiplied with 1 plus growth rate will give you D1. So the formula here is for KE, D1 divided by P naught. P naught is current market price only. So D1 divided by P naught plus growth rate. Can we write it another way also? Yes. D naught multiplied with 1 plus growth rate, which is nothing but D1, which is in numerator, divided by P naught plus growth rate. Like this also it can be written. But this is a Gordon's growth formula, constant growth formula. So the growth rate is known and dividend currently is known. Definitely we can find out D1. Then current market price is known, which is a fact. If we have all this data, we can find out the cost of equity. So that is Gordon's growth model for KE calculation. Of course, in some cases, let us say, there are flotation costs. As we discussed earlier, for the issue of bonds and debentures also, there will be flotation costs. If that information is given, then denominator will change. Denominator will be what in that case? Instead of P naught, it will be P naught minus the flotation costs. So, because P naught is the current market price, if, it's all imagination only, we are talking expectation, future, imagination, nothing is real actually. So D1 is the expected dividend next year. P naught is the current market price, okay, that is reality. But if you issue the price, if you issue the shares in the market now, today, this will be the money that it fetches. With that logic, it is taken as P naught. But will that be completely coming to you? No. Why? Because there will be flotation costs. That is why in the denominator, when there are flotation costs, we have to reduce it from P naught. So D1 by P naught minus F plus growth rate will be the formula only when there are flotation costs also per share. Of course, when we are looking at P naught is market price per share, F flotation cost also should be per share. D1 is also dividend per share, but is it the existing dividend? No. Existing dividend is D naught. D1 is what? Expected dividend, next expected dividend. So this is where you need to read the question very carefully. Sometimes the question language will tell us whether it is D naught or D1. We cannot be always taking whatever the question says as a D1. So we have to read the question carefully. Main decision as far as understanding the question is concerned is what is given in the question. Is D naught given or D1 given? If we mistake or if we have a wrong judgment there, automatically answer will be wrong. So be careful. So whatever D1 we are looking at, that is the next expected dividend. It is not current dividend, it is not past dividend. It is future dividend, which is not real, which is an expectation. How can we do that expectation? No, again, not with any other methods. We know already how much is the current dividend, which is D naught. Then, with our expected growth rate, next year it will become D1. So D naught multiplied with 1 plus growth rate will give us D1. That is clear. But main point is, in the question, which one is given? If D naught is given, you have to do this calculation, then find out D1. Sometimes D1 is directly given, then don't do this, not required. So depending upon what information is given, you need to choose the formula very, very carefully and then substitute, get the answer. Look at this illustration 9, application of this formula. A company has paid. So is it past or future? Past. A dividend of 1 rupee per share on a face value of 10 rupees each, that doesn't matter, last year and is expected to grow at the rate of 10% next year. So existing dividend already what is there now is 1 rupee DPS, that is D naught. So that is the main point. D naught is 1 and that is going to expected to grow at the rate of 10% next year. So 1 multiplied with 1.1 will be naturally 1.1. So add 10% to 1, that will be 1.1. So what is this 1.1? Now that will be D1. So D1 is 1.1. Market price per share is 55. That's all. Market price is 55. D1 by P naught plus G. Growth rate 10%. Calculations we need to do carefully. Here 10% means 0.1. Percentages have to be converted to numbers while doing these calculations. 55 is a real number, it is not a percentage. 1.1 is a number, it's a rupee amount. But 10% is not a number by itself. What is the number of 10%? 0.1. So that should be added here. So 1.1 divided by 55 plus 0.1 that gives 12%. That's it. That is the cost of equity. So first calculations have to be done with decimals, then we have to reconvert them to percentages. 0.12 is the answer, which is nothing but 12%. That is KE using Gordon's growth model. D1 divided by P naught plus G. That is there. And some other models, like if at all the growth is variable growth, not a constant growth rate like 10% in this case, those things can also be checked. In fact, the next chapter, the other chapter is dividend decisions. There is one more chapter. There it will be discussed in detail. Now coming to one more important aspect, this growth rate. Growth rate generally will be given in the question. If it is given, there is no problem. You just have to substitute it. However, sometimes it may not be given. It may not be given. It has to be calculated. So, how can we calculate the growth rate? Normally, the compounded annual growth rate, popularly called CAGR, can be calculated using this methodology. Nth root of D0 divided by Dn minus 1. That is the growth rate. Easy to say. Formula is okay. But problem is, first of all, you can't find out nth root always with the normal calculator. Even if you can also, it is waste of time. No need of that. And second thing, if at all, we can use the FAF tables. But generally, those are not going to be given in the examinations because of logistical problems. So what we can say safely as far as this method is concerned, better to ignore it. There is no other way than just to ignore it. Only if the time period is 2 years or 4 years, this is okay. Then it can be done. So only for that particular purpose, you can do this. Like for example, fourth root of is okay if you do 2 times the square root. To that extent, it is okay. D0 by D1 minus 1. Let us say 4 years back, dividend was 8 rupees. 5 years ago, again it is going to be cumbersome. So let us take 4 years ago. Let us take an example. 4 years ago, dividend was 8 rupees. Now, it is say 12 rupees or say 14 rupees, whatever. So 4 years back, dividend was 8 rupees. Now it is 14 rupees. So what is 4 years back dividend? DN, dividend n years ago. So this is DN. Current dividend, now it is D0. So 14 divided by 8, 1.75, D0 by Dn, 1.75. We need to take fourth root of that. So we have to press square root 2 times, fourth root of that. Minus 1 multiplied with 100, percentages wise, it gives 15% approximately is the compounded annual growth rate. You can check that. 8 is the original dividend, add 15% to that. That is 1 year, another 15% to that. Next year, another 15% to that. Next year, another 15% to that. Approximately 14. So 15% is the growth rate in that case. So can be done only either if FAF tables are given or the time period is 2 years or 4 years. 2 years is anyway generally rubbish. So 4 years, in that case, it is okay. So that is the formula for computation of growth rate if we have to use compounded annual growth rate type of formula. Nth root of D0 divided by Dn minus 1. That's it. So that is going to be the application of compounding effect simply. However, for that purpose, we need FAF tables. If at all, the number of years is 5 years, 6 years like that. We can use them if they are given in the examination. Look at this example, say current dividend is 16.1. 5 years ago it was 10. So 10 became 16.1. How much is going to be the growth rate? How much could be the growth rate? First thing first, 16.1 divided by 10, that is D0 by Dn. That gives you 1.61. So this 1.61 has to be looked at in the future value tables. FAIF. For how much period we are looking at? 5 years. So 5 years, 1.61, where will that be? 5 years, 1.61. Yeah, here it is, 1.61 approximately. So 5 years, 1.61 it became means 10% is the growth rate. Like that it can be calculated by using the tables. Or if it is 4 years, it is easy. Just you have to press the square root button twice using this formula. Nth root of d naught by dn minus 1. That is possible. Rare, very rare, but possible. So don't ignore this. If at all problem asks such kind of methodology to be computed, then you cannot go away from that. However, definitely consideration will be given whether it is possible to normally calculate without tables or not. So naturally the time period in that case in the examination problem also should be 4 years. If it is something else, tables have to be given. So that is the possibility only of average method being used for computation of growth rate, which is compounded annual growth rate, average growth rate, we can call whatever it is. But usually that is not what we use. We use Gordon's growth model formula. So whatever is Gordon's growth rate, we can call this, because Gordon has derived this formula. In this case, growth rate is equal to B multiplied with R. What is B? B is retention ratio. Now, retention ratio is nothing but a complement of payout ratio. Dividend payout ratio, we should know already. So what is dividend payout ratio? Out of the earnings per share, how much dividend is paid? That is dividend payout ratio, DPS by EPS. Whatever that ratio may be, let us say if it is 40%, complement of that will be retention ratio. That means retention ratio will be 60%. If this is 30%, the retention ratio will be 70%. Total of them should be equal to 1 or 100%. So retention ratio is nothing but a complement of dividend payout ratio. That is what is R. Multiply that with rate of return on the funds invested. Generally it can be taken either a return on investment or internal rate of return which the company generates normally in its projects. Either of them can be taken as R, either of them can be given in the examination. So any one can be taken. R is nothing but return normally that is achieved by the company on the investment. That's what is IRR. That's what is return on investment. So any of them can be given in the question. Whatever is given, we have to take that. So that is R. B is what something most of the times you have to calculate, which is retention ratio. Retention ratio is nothing but a complement of payout ratio. Payout ratio formula we already know. So we can first find out payout ratio, dividend payout ratio, which is nothing but DPS by EPS. Then 1 minus that payout ratio or 100 minus that payout ratio will give you retention ratio. That's all. That is growth rate formula. B multiplied with R. That is one more model for computation of G, the growth rate. Of course, both of them are used in Gordon's growth model, wherein we needed this G. So D naught by P naught, sorry, D1 by P naught plus G, or D1 by P naught minus F plus G. Any of them, as the information is given to us, we have to use any of these formulae for computation of KE. That was our main objective. For that purpose, we needed G. Most of the times it will be given directly in the question. If not given, we should be able to calculate. How? Maybe by using average method if the information is given so, or by using the Gordon's growth model formula, which is G is equal to B multiplied with R. B is the retention ratio. R is the return that is generated normally by the company on its investment. Means how much proportion of the funds of your earnings you are investing or you are retaining, and what is your return on the normal investment. Multiplication of these two will give us G. That is growth rate calculation formula, very, very important. So these are the three different approaches what we have seen for the computation of KE. One is dividend price approach, second one earnings price approach. Third one, Gordon's growth model, wherein D1 by P naught plus G is used as a formula for computation of KE. Now moving on to another approach, that is called realized yield approach. What is the difference between other approaches and this approach? Is all other approaches look into future. We are looking at D1, which is not now, it is future, it is expectation actually. Growth rate is not now. Growth rate happened already, but the same growth rate is expected to be continued in future. So normally any method, since we are looking at KE as an expectation, always looks into future. But realized yield method, because of the practicality of actually not being able to look into future, which is almost impossible in most of the cases, realized yield approach is a practical approach where it looks into past. So past performance at least can be safely presumed, again not guaranteed. It's all presumptions, assumptions only. Equity is always about risk. Equity is always about fluctuations. So much of uncertainty, risk associated with that. So that is there. But at least on the basis of the past performance, we can consider the same past performance as expected return in the future also. That is the concept of realized yield approach. Realized means really whatever the return that is generated from a particular equity share of a company, that past performance is presumed to be continued in future. That itself is the expected return according to this approach. That itself will be what? Yield means KE. Simply, the KE is calculated on the basis of the past performance. It is easy to actually implement because past performance is a fact and it is there. All the records are available. All that you need to just do is some calculations. But problem with this is it has unrealistic assumption. Biggest unrealistic assumption is that past will continue in future. That nobody can guarantee that. That is an absolute unrealistic assumption, but still there is no option. In this approach, that assumption is taken. So where the earnings are not stable, where the company is having different rates of earnings or fluctuations in its overall performance, such kind of companies should not use realized yield approach, because this approach only focuses on a really almost stable type of companies. They can use it, otherwise it is not a very practically used model also. Even for that matter, examination point of view also, we don't use this much, except when a separate question is asked on this. Normally, what we use in the examinations are going to be these formulae. If nothing is given or particularly asked, most important thing is this. That's all. That is a straightforward Gordon's model which we use in the examinations for computation of KE. Other approaches we need to know. CAPM of course is important, but even realized yield approach, a separate question can be given. Completely a unique question only on this approach. If it is given, we should be able to do. That is why we need to know this. But what is there in this big deal? Nothing. It's just a calculation. Basically, common sense. Let us look at illustration 10. Mr. Mehra had purchased a share of Alpha Limited for 1000 rupees. So originally he purchased some share of some company for 1000 rupees. He received dividend for a period of 5 years at the rate of 10%. At the end of 5th year, he sold the share of Alpha Limited for 1128. Means there is dividend also during all this period, 5 years, and there is a capital gain also. Both are yield only, both are his returns only. What is the cost of equity as per the realized yield approach is the question. So ultimately, what we have here is going to be the years, various years that happened. And whatever the original purchase price is 1000 rupees. And later on, last year, 5th year, let us say the selling price or the price at which he sold is 1128 rupees. The realized yield or yield is that percentage of discount rate, whatever that percentage is which we have to calculate, that percentage of discount rate, wherein if you use that percentage and discount all the dividends that are received for 5 years, not only that, the end of the year, end of the 5th year, 1128. If that is all discounted with some discount rate, that should be equal to 1000. So if you put this in a formula type of situation, 1000 is the amount that he paid. D1 is 100 as given in the question. 10% on face value. Always face value is the amount on which we have to find out or calculate dividend and interest also for that matter. So 100 divided by 1 plus KE. Again next year another 100 rupees is received, but what is the present value of that? 1 plus KE square. Again next year 100 is received. 1 plus KE to the power of 3 or cube. Again 100 is received. 1 plus KE to the power of 4. 1 plus KE to the power of 5. This is the present value of all the dividends that are going to be received for 5 years. Not only that, he is also having at the end of 5th year received 1128. So 1 plus KE to the power of 5. How much ever is that KE which equates this, which makes this equation possible, is the yield, real yield. That is the realized yield approach. Easy to say. Can we solve this just like that? Not possible. So what is the way to solve this? Going back to tables and IRR method can be used. So let us say in this case, whatever the KE, if you are assuming that as say 10%, trial and error. So what is the present value of the annuity factor for 10% for 5 years? Present value annuity factor we have to look at. Annuity, ordinary annuity. 10% is the rate we have taken. For 5 years, it should be 3.791. 3.791 multiplied with 100, each year same amount is received, plus 1128 multiplied with present value interest rate factor for 10% at the for 5th year 0.621. 0.621. So just do this multiplication. That should be equal to 1000. If it will not be. If it is equal to 1000, then 10% is the realized yield. So 3.791 multiplied with 100 and 1128 multiplied with 0.621. Adding them, it is coming to around how much? 1080. At 10%, it is 1080. In other words, for understanding purposes, NPV here is 80 positive, but we want NPV 0. That means we need to increase the discount rate. Let us increase the discount rate, for example, to 12% to be safe. Again, do the calculation. PVIF A at 12%, 5 years, 3.605. So 3.605 multiplied with 100 plus 1128 multiplied with what is the 5th year's PVIF for 12%, 0.567. Let us see this. 3.605 multiplied with 100. Keep it aside. 1128 multiplied with 0.567. Add to that. It is coming exactly 1000. 1000.076,000. So now we have it. 12% is the realized yield. So like this, realized yield can be calculated by using IRR concept, wherein that percentage should make the present value of all the dividends that are received plus the present value of the final amount that is received at the end of the holding period. There is no life here. This Mr. Mehra has held these shares for 5 years. So end of 5th year, he sold it for 1128. What is the present value of that? Plus, what is the present value of all the amounts that he has received in the form of dividends? All of them should be equated to the original purchase price. So that will be the better way of doing realized yield approach. In other words, simply It is a IRR type of calculation. So at 12%, this is equaling to around 1000. So we can safely say 12% is the cost of equity in that particular example. That's it. Now look at this illustration number 11. Calculate the cost of equity from the following data using realized yield approach. So look at this. Dividend per share is not same. It is changing here. So we cannot use the annuity factor. Price per share at the beginning is 9 and at the end of 5th year it is beginning of 5th year is 10.6, right? So whatever the overall rate is, that can be found out. Each year whatever is going to be the actual return in terms of the realized yield, that can be taken as average also, because we are talking about beginning of the 5th year. So end of 4th year only is the point. We cannot go beyond that. So whatever the end of 4th year data is there, that is only there. So 5 years though it is given, it is going to be basically 4 years analysis only. So what is the yield in each of the years? It can be done. What can be the yield in each of the years? It can be just normally just calculated. Simply taking this. For example, year 1 is going to be this 9.75. It will become from 9. And there is going to be 1 rupee dividend in beginning of year 2 means end of year 1, D1 that is. So beginning is this one, starting point is year 1. This one is not relevant, already it is past. On top of it, what is going to happen? Let us say somebody purchased this share for 9 rupees. So what is he going to receive? He is going to receive 1 rupee dividend and he is going to receive 9.75 at the end of that year if he sells it. So 9.75 plus 1, 10.75 new divided by old minus 1 multiplied with 100. How much is the rate here? That is 19.44% growth rate is there, or yield is there for year 1. Year 1 that is. Same way for year 2. Year 2, what is happening? In this case, originally it is 9.75. Dividend per share is not at the beginning, it is during the year only. This price per share is at the beginning. So during year 2 also, same 1 rupee is there. But end of year 2, which is beginning of year 3, the share became 11.5. So new, what is the total amount that anybody would receive by investing 9.75 rupees? He will receive 11.5 rupees plus 1 rupee dividend during that year divided by 9.75 minus 1 multiplied with 100. That gives around 28.21% of yield that year. Same way for next year also can be calculated. So now 11.5 is the investment to be made. Next year, what will be the dividend in that case? That year only, that is year 3 only, that is 1.2. But the 11.5 will become 11. So 11 plus 11, 1.2 divided by 11.5. So how much is your initial investment? How much is the initial investment is the denominator? How much is the end of the year sale price plus whatever dividend received during the year in numerator? So 1.2 plus 11 is 12.2 divided by 11.5 minus 1 multiplied with 100. That gives around 6.1% we can say of yield that year. That is a return in that year. Same thing can be done for next year also. 1.25 is going to be the dividend of that year plus share price at the end of that year will be 10.6. Initial investment is 11. So how much will that be? 1.25 plus 10.6 divided by 11 minus 1 multiplied with 100. Around 7.6 0.73% we can say is the realized yield. So like this, realized yield can be calculated separately for each of the years, year 1, year 2, year 3 and year 4. In this case, we calculated each of them yearly speaking. Then there are two ways of again continuing with this. Either we can take a geometric mean of that, or we can take an arithmetic mean of that also. Naturally, geometric mean is better than arithmetic mean, no doubt about it. However, in this case, if geometric mean has to be taken, we should be able to do the fourth root. So if at all we have to take the geometric mean, in this case if we take 1 plus year 1's yield, like that 1 plus year 2's yield, 1 so on and so forth till 1 plus year n's yield, whole to the power of 1 divided by n, that is like means nth root of all this minus 1. That will be the geometric mean of all this. Can be taken also. Particularly if nothing is asked, for convenience in the examination, you can take arithmetic mean also, no problem. So there is no issue with that. There is no rule that you have to take geometric mean only. Arithmetic mean, if you take 19.44 plus 28.21 plus 6.1 plus 7.73 divided by 4 years, around 10.5% is the realized yield, arithmetic mean wise. It has its limitations because it only gives a very simple average. But geometric mean gives a better picture of what is the growth rate actually that has happened and what is the cost of equity in this case, which can be calculated by taking all these percentages as part of geometric mean. So 1 plus 19.44%, what we calculated is 1.1944. Same way, 1.1281, multiply that, multiply all the 4, then take fourth root of it, then minus 1 will give you the KE. So do this multiplication simply. 1.1944 multiply with 1.2821 multiply with 1.0609 to be specific, multiplied with 1.0773. Multiply all of them. Fourth root of that you have to take. Fourth root we know how to take. Just press square root button twice. Square root button twice. Minus 1. Multiply with 100. That gives you 15% as KE. Anyway, that is only possible in examination conditions if 4 years data is given. More than that, or 5th year, 3rd year, these things are not practical to be computed in the examination. Logic is important. What is realized yield is simply, if at all, there is one initial point of investment and after a few years that investment is sold. The present value of all the dividends that are received from that investment plus the present value of the amount at which that share is sold at the end of its holding period should be equal to the initial purchase price. At what percentage of discount rate that happens? That is realized yield. That is one of the cases what we looked at, which was this Mehra situation. On the other side, instead of one particular person, if the data related to a company is given, each year there will be a yield. So if somebody, let us say, invested at the beginning of first year and sold this share at the end of first year, he would have made 19.44%. If somebody did the same in the second year, 28.21%. But what if somebody just invested in first year but actually sold it at the end of fourth year? So there is a change there. That is not going to happen each year. There is not going to be any sale or purchase. So he would have received all these things and he would have sold this at any particular point of time. So from a company perspective, realized yield approach can be used like this. Whatever is the dividend during this particular year plus whatever the share price at the end of that year divided by the share price at the beginning of the year. Numerator is giving us the overall return that is coming in the form of dividend also and sale price at the end of the year also. Denominator is the investment itself. So that is calculating each of the years yield. Then taking the geometric mean of each of the years yield, we will get the realized yield. That itself is taken as KE, that is cost of equity. Now that we are using already the time value of money concept and cost of equity is being calculated using the realized yield approach. Similar logic can be used for cost of debt also, which we skipped in the earlier session. Now we can come back to that. Using a YTM approach, yield to maturity approach, cost of debt can be also calculated. Same way, logic is same. Only thing is, in case of equity shares, it will be dividend. In case of debt, it will be interest. That's it. So what is going to be YTM approach here? It is again kind of IRR calculation, wherein that percentage of discount rate at which there is a present value of all the interest cash flows for the company net of tax and redemption value at the end of its life, present value of that should be equal to the net proceeds initially. At what rate if we discount the future interest and redemption value will give us the sum total of it being equal to net proceeds initially. So how to calculate this yield to maturity? Just like realized yield approach. First thing first, cash flows to be identified. Then we have to find out NPV, net present value of the cash flows, using different discount rates with a reasonable guessing or trial and error method. Then calculate IRR. That IRR itself is YTM, that is yield to maturity. Let us apply this in this example too. Let us say a company has issued 10,000 number of 10% debentures of 100 rupees each to be matured on 1/4/2018, issued on 1/4/2013. That means we are talking about 5 years. That is the time period of the particular debenture. The company wants to know the current cost of its existing debt and market price of the debentures is 80. Compute the cost of existing debentures assuming a 35% tax rate. So first of all, when we look at current cost, always we need to take current market price. So the P0 or sorry the net proceeds can be taken as 80 only. That is cash flows in year 0. Then year 1 to 5, what will be the cash flows to the company? Interest cost, but after tax. So 10% debentures on 100 means 10 rupees will be the interest cost. Tax rate is 35%. So whatever I into 1 minus tax rate will be 6.5 rupees per debenture. Redeemable value, nothing is given means it is face value, that is 100. So all that we need to do is, what is the present value of this 6.5 and this 100? That should be equated to 80. At which discount rate if we do, that will be equal to 80. That has to be calculated. For that purpose, we need to find out IRR. For that purpose, we need to first of all start with some discount rate. Let us say 10% discount rate. PVIF A you can take for this 6.5. So 6.5, 10% we are looking at 5 years already, 3.791. 3.791 multiplied with 6.5 will give us around 24.64, let us say. Then what is the present value of this 100, which is going to be the redeemable value after 5 years? Again, referring to the tables, PVIF at 10% for 5 years is 0.621. So 0.621. So that itself will give around 62.1. So 62.1 plus 24.64 is giving you 86.74. Which means there is an NPV positive of 6.74 even now. This is NPV 1, which is positive NPV 6.74. We need to make it 0. How? We need to increase the discount rate. That is the only way. So let us increase the discount rate to say 15% to be safe side. 15%. Again, look at the annuity factor, or anything can be taken. Let us say 16% in this table. 16% is there approximately. 0.476 is going to be the PVIF. So 0.476 means 47.6 multiplying with 100. Then PVIF A at 16% is going to be 3.274. 3.274 multiplied with 6.5 will be around 3.274. 3.274 multiplied with 6.5. That will be around 21.3, let us say. So 21.3 plus 47.6 means 68.9 only is there at 16%. We could have taken 14% also. Whatever it is, they should be given in the question. We just need one negative NPV, one positive NPV. So at 10% it was positive NPV. At 16% it is going to be a negative 11.1. That's all. We know the IRR formula. We should substitute in that. NPV1 divided by NPV1 minus NPV2 multiplied with R2 minus R1. So 6.74 divided by 6.74 minus of minus will become plus. So 17.84 is the denominator. 6.74 divided by 17.84 multiplied with 6 is the difference. Adding that to the original R1, it comes around 12.3, 12.27, like that we got 12.27, approximately same, 12.2 let us say. That is going to be the yield to maturity. That is the yield of this bond. Nothing but internal rate of return, nothing but the discount rate at which if you discount the future after tax interest and future redeemable value, that should be equal to the current market price. That's all. That is one more way of calculating cost of debt also. Like this also KD can be calculated. KD and KE in these two cases, realized yield approach and YTM method, logic is same. Only thing is, in case of equity, what is the earnings or what is the return that equity is giving is called dividend, and there will not be any redeemable value in equity. That is why the price at which a particular investor wants to sell, or whatever is the price at the end of that period, in reality that can be taken as the end of the period cash flows. But those earnings in the form of dividend plus the final sale value, if discounted at what rate, they will be equal to current market price. If we can calculate, that is KE. Same logic here also. If after tax interest cash flows and redeemable value are discounted, at which rate they will be equal to current market price, that will be the yield of a bond. So bonds yields are calculated like this. Methodology is same. Another difference between these two is in case of dividend there is no tax impact. In case of interest there is tax impact also, as we observed in the calculations of this KD, but concept is still same. Now look at this illustration number 4. Institutional Development Bank issued zero interest deep discount bonds of face value 1 lakh rupees each, issued at 2,500 rupees, payable after 25 years. What is the cost of debt? Imagining there is no corporate tax. That is the point here. At what rate? For 25 years. Do we have that? In the tables it is not there, but we have to find it. Should be given. Maybe you have in the normal tables. So the point is, in this case, 1 lakh rupees face value, 0 interest, means no interest at all. So after 25 years, it will give 1 lakh. That 1 lakh, if at all, if you discount it with some rate, we don't know that rate, that should be equal to what? 2,500. So that rate can be found out by taking this trial and error method. So 2,500 multiplied with 1 plus r to the power of 25 is equal to 1 lakh. So 1 plus r to the power of 25 is 1 lakh divided by 2,500, that is 40. R has to be solved with the present value tables only. This can be solved. It is okay to do like this in the material to the power of 25 to the power of 25, but practically it is not possible. So for 25 years, we need what is the present value factor? At what rate? Whatever the rate it is. So just downloaded this PVIF tables. We need 25 years, and at some rate it should be equal to 1 lakh multiplied with that should be equal to 2,500. So at 25 years, if at all, you take 0.03, that is at 15% rate. So at 15% rate, what is PVIF for 25 years from the tables? It is 0.03. So 0.03 multiplied with 1 lakh will be naturally 3,000. But 2,500 is the present value of that. So that means still there is an NPV of 500. So at 15% there is NPV 500. This is NPV 1. Let us take at 16%, how much will this be? From the tables only. At 16%, 25 years, 0.024 multiplied with 1 lakh. Naturally, it will be 2,400 only. That means NPV 2 is going to be minus 100. So we have two NPVs. Easily we can calculate IRR. Same way. NPV 1, R1 plus, of course. So 15 plus NPV 1 is 500 divided by 500, minus becomes plus. So 600 multiplied with R2 minus R1 is 1. So 500 by 600. 5 by 6 plus 15. So simply 15.83% approximately. 15.8% will be the IRR. So that is going to be the yield of the bond. That itself is cost of debt. So that is the another approach for calculating cost of debt, particularly using the concept of time value of money. This approach is called YTM method. Present value approach we can call it for simple purposes. Next, another situation is also there possibly where the bond can be amortized. That means there is a possibility that principal is repaid every year than at maturity. Then what happens? The principal amount will go down with the annual payments because principal is reducing as the payments are happening each year. So in that case also present value approach can be used. How to do that? Same way. Whatever is the cash flow that is going to be there in relation to the bond, that has to be discounted with some discount rate. Whatever that discount rate is, that will be the yield of the bond or cost of that debt, which equates all these cash flows to the present value, which is the value of the bond or market price of the bond. Now, for understanding purposes, let us look at this illustration 5. RMBL is proposing to sell a 5-year bond of 5,000 rupees at 8% rate of interest per annum. Bond amount will be amortized equally over its life. Calculate the bond's present value for an investor if he expects a minimum rate of return of 6%. So it is a reverse case. KD is not asked. KD is known already. That is the expected rate of return in this case, which is 6%. Now we need to find out value of the bond. So value of the bond can be found out also. There is no need of IRR approach in this case. Straight away we can just discount the future cash flows with the same rate, which is expected rate, in this case 6%. So what will be the point in the case of every year repayment? Outstanding amount will be keeping on reducing each year naturally. So interest also will keep on reducing. So first we have to find out interest. Assuming this payments happen at the end of the year, naturally beginning of the year nobody will pay. End of the year, equally it is amortized, means each year 1,000 is paid. So first year rate of interest on this bond is 8%. That amount of interest which the investor will receive will be 400, which is 5,000 into 8%. Afterwards, for second year, it will reduce because already 1,000 is paid. Only 4,000 remains as principal. On that 8% is 320. Again, next year also interest will reduce further. So each year 80 will reduce. So 240, then 160, then 80. This is interest amounts for 5 years. And end of 5th year, outstanding amount will be 0 because entire amount is already paid off. So how much is the amount in the form of outflows for the company RMBL each year? 1,000 rupees principal amount plus interest amount also it has to pay. So first year it will be 1,400, second year it will be 1,320, third year 1,240, then 1,160, last year 1,080. These are the cash outflows for the company. Of course, here we are ignoring the tax. It is not given, so ignoring the tax. These are the cash outflows for the company. Then they have to be discounted with the expected rate of return. This is 6%. So we are calculating the value of the bond from investor's point of view. 1,400, 1,320 company will pay, investor will receive. What is the present value of all of them? At 6%. That has to be calculated. And since they are not same, you need to definitely use normal computation of present value type of situation. Year and cash flows, then PVIF, then discounted cash flows. Year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Cash flows are changing. 1,400, 1,320, 1,240, 1,160, 1,080. These are the cash flows. Then PVIF at the rate of 6% will be 1 divided by 1.06. That divided by 1.06 and so on and so forth. It can be calculated or it can be taken from tables also as per the convenience. Then what are the discounted cash flows? Multiplication of them and totaling all of them will give us the present value of the bond, that is 5262.55. So if the company point of view, you have to look at, if the company wants to fix a price for this bond, face value is 5,000. But at what price it should sell now? 5262. From investor's point of view, at what price investor can purchase? 5262. That is the present value of the bond. This is simply bond valuation using present value concept. So approximately around 5262.62 or a 5263, let us say. That is the value of the bond simply by discounting the future cash flows at the expected rate of return for the investors. In this case, expected rate is 6%. Now, since we are talking about valuation of the bond, is the bond going to be sold at a premium or discount in this case? Yes, it is going to be sold at premium. because face value of the bond is 5,000. We found out the value of the bond is actually 5263. How? Why is it going to be sold at premium? Again, common sense, logical point. Expectation of the investor is only 6%, whereas the bond is offering 8%. So the return on the bond is more than the expectation. Naturally, the bond will be sold at premium. So when the expectation of the investors is lesser than the actual return given by the bond will be sold at premium. On the contrary, if a bond gives any return less than the expectation of the investors, then it will be sold at discount. Means it will be less than the face value. That is another conceptual point which we can infer from this computation. That is valuation of the bond. So when we talk about bond, if value of the bond is given, we should be able to find out what is this rate at which all the present values of these future cash flows will equate to the value of the bond. That will be YTM. When is that? If value is given already. If this is not given, value is supposed to be found out. Simply we just have to find out the present value of all the future cash flows, discounting at the expected rate of return of investors. Then we'll get value of the bond. Either way questions can be asked. We should be able to do both of them. Now coming to another way of situation or another possibility, cost of convertible debentures, how it will be. How can that be calculated? Convertible debentures means those which can be converted to either preference shares, nobody does that, usually equity shares. So some number of shares will be given to the convertible debenture holders after some time. That is called convertible debentures. Then how to find out? Logic is same. Logic is always same. Whether we talked about realized yield approach, whether we talk about YTM, whether we talk about valuation of bond, for that matter valuation of anything, valuation of equity share, valuation of bond or valuation of anything in the world, logic is same. Simply the present value of the future cash flows, that's all, will be the price, current price. But if we don't know the rate itself, then we have to use IRR method. If you know the current market price and you know the future cash flows, at what rate, if the future cash flows are discounted, that will be equated to current market price, will give us cost of capital, in this case bond or debenture. So let us look at this example. A company issued 10,000 15% convertible debentures of 100 rupees each with a maturity period of 5 years. At maturity, the debenture holders will have an option to convert the debentures into equity shares of the company in the ratio of 1:10. Means 10 shares for each debenture. So each debenture will be converted to 10 shares. Current market price of equity shares is 12 rupees each. Historically, the growth rate of the shares is 5% per annum. So definitely 12 rupees market price will not be same after 5 years, right? Historically, growth rate is 5%. So this can be simply just calculated. What could be the market price after 5 years for these equity shares? Just 12, add 5%, another 5%, another 5%, another 5%, another 5%. Simply it can be around 15.31. So 12 rupees market price now, after 5 years for that share will become around 15.31 or 15.32. But one bond or one debenture gives 10 such shares. That means what is the benefit that anybody will get multiplying with 10? Around 153.2 approximately. When is this happening? After 5 years it is going to happen. Now what is the cost of debentures? Assuming 35% tax rate is asking. So here 100 rupees is the existing price. And in future, after 5 years, one shot conversion happens. The value of that conversion is around 153.2. That is there. Now, what is going to be the cost is asked here. Of course, we can use present value method also, or we can use old simple formula type of method also. In this case, if you use the old formula, this KD formula, RV will be taken as 153.2. Remaining things are known already to us. So I interest is going to be how much? 100 rupees debenture, 15% means 15 rupees. So 15 rupees into 1 minus tax rate, 1 minus 0.35 plus RV minus NP by N. So 153.2 minus 100 divided by 5 years, whole divided by RV plus NP by 2 average. That will give us KD, which we know the formula, approximation method. So solving that, you will get KD. So 15 multiplied with 1.035, 15.525. Sorry, not 1.035, 1 minus 0.35. That means 0.65. 0.65 into 15, that will be 9.75 plus 153.2 minus 100 divided by 5. That will be around 10.64 around, divided by 153.2 plus 100 divided by 2 average, 126.6. So how much will that be? So 9.75 plus 10.64 divided by 126.6 for expression percentage. Around 16.1% is going to be the cost of debt in this case using approximation method. Or we can use present value also. Quite possible. Present value method also can be used. In this case, each of the years, what are going to be the cash flows? 9.75, because after tax cash flows for the company are going to be 9.75 only. Though 15 rupees per debenture is going to be the interest, after tax it is 9.75. What is the annuity factor related to that? Taking approximately 15%, that can be calculated. So again, a type of IRR calculation once again will come into picture. So 5 years is what we are looking at. 5 years, 9.75 is going to be the annual cash flow. So 9.75 multiplied with some annuity factor plus end of the period. What is happening? End of the period 153.2, what we have taken. Just let us continue with that. 153.2 multiplied with some PVIF. That should be equal to what? Existing issue price, that is 100 rupees. But directly can we know that? We cannot. That is why we have to use IRR, which is trial and error method. So let us calculate one thing at some percentage, say 15%. At 15%, 15% is not there. Say 16%, that's okay. Whatever is there, we can take that. Say 16%, we are taking at 5 years, 3.274. Okay. So 9.75 multiplied with 3.274 plus 153.2 multiplied with, we take PVIF at 16% for 5 years, 0.476. How much will that be? Calculate that. 9.75 multiplied with 3.274 m plus 153.2 multiplied with 0.476 m plus, total is coming to around 104.85 approximately. 104.85, which means there is a positive NPV of 4.85 still. Now let us recalculate this at a higher rate. So we have NPV1, this one. Let us recalculate NPV2. Again 9.75. At what rate? Let us take 18% as it is there. So 4.437, this one is different. So 153.2 multiplied with 0.437. Or to be safer side, we can take 20%. Let us take 0.402. Let us take 20%. 0.402, 153.2. Then PVIF-A, 20%, 5 years, 2.991. How much will that be? 9.75 multiplied with 2.991 M plus 153.2 multiplied with 0.402 M plus. Total is going to be 90.75. Which means NPV2 is going to be a negative 9.25. Negative. That's all. We have NPV1, we have NPV2. Just IRR we have to find out. So 4.85 divided by 4.85 minus of minus becomes plus, that is 14.1, multiplied with which rates we have taken, 16 and 20. So rate difference is 4 plus 16. So 4.85 divided by 14.1 multiplied with 4 plus 16, that comes to around 17.4% we say. That is the cost of debt. Around 17.4. That is cost of debt. So like this also, cost of debt can be calculated using the present value approach, and this can be called YTM approach, or any such matter, any for such situations where even convertible debentures are there, they can also be calculated like this. Value of them can be calculated, cost of them can be calculated. All that we need to apply is the present value approach, that is time value of money. So realized yield in equity, YTM in debt. Use time value of money concept also for the computations. But once again, if rate is given, we should be able to find out value. If current market price or value is given, we should be able to find out rate. If rate is given, value is simply calculating the present value of future cash flows. That's it. But on the contrary, if rate is not given, if that is what we have to find out, because the chapter itself is cost of capital, we need that rate. That is not given. Then what we should do? We should equate the present value of the future cash flows, whatever they are, interest, dividend, redeemable value, convertible value, sale value at the end of some period for equity shares, whatever it could be, whatever the future cash flows are, they have to be discounted with some rate so that they will be equal to the current market price. That cannot be found out easily. That is why we have to use IRR method for such kind of computations. So this is the application of time value of money concept even for the purpose of computation of cost of capital. With that, we will conclude current session. In the next session, we will continue this discussion with the CAPM approach, capital asset pricing method or model for cost of equity, and then also we will move on to computation of weighted average cost of capital. Once you know each of these costs of capital, KD separately, KP separately, KE separately, all of them have to be weighted average. How to do that also we will discuss in the next session. Till then, take care. Bye bye. Thank you very much.